Hello, and welcome to the vlog where I have to read all the SPFBO finalists. I just have to do that this month, so I figured I should start the vlog. This will be the first half of the SPFBO finalists. I have no idea what reading order I'm going to read them in. I've kind of been struggling with that. I know a lot of my friends that are participating in SPFBO Cassidys version are doing like wheels or really thinking through the order they're going to read things in. I am just going to go based on the mood I'm in and the vibe I'm looking for. There's no real plan going into this. I probably should explain to you what SPFBO Cassidys version is, but I feel like I've done that so many times on my channel, so I hope you just already know what it is. But if you don't, there is a website down below that you can read everything about SPFBO Cassidys version. It will have up-to-date thoughts from the bloggers involved with it, because there's 10 of us all together. It'll have links to any content. There is also just SPFBO Cassidys version, the playlist on my channel. There are a lot of things that you could check out if you're interested in learning more about what SPFBO Cassidys version is. It's essentially SPFBO, but I wanted to be a part of it, so it has nothing to do with the actual SPFBO competition. I just got 10 people together and said, let's read all the finalists and rank them like they do in SPFBO and compare our results. That's essentially it. I just wanted to participate because I love the idea of it so much. So I have 5 books to read and tell you about, so I didn't want this intro to be too long. We will be using the rubric that I made for SPFBO Cassidys version to rate all these. Let's get on with the first one, because why not? I have no idea what I'm reading, so future Cassidy will tell you what she's reading. I'm 100 pages into the Umbral Storm. I was actually very nervous for this one because Rachel has read it and Rachel didn't love it, and one of the things Rachel really didn't love was the world building. Rachel is one of the 9 other bloggers joining me, so you can check out Rachel's thoughts in her review either on her Instagram or on the website under the Umbral Storm. The funny thing is, I'm adoring the world building. So the Umbral Storm is not a book for everyone because it is an indentured slave as our protagonist. We are following, for the first 100 pages, talks of slavery and harsh things happening to our protagonist. And I know that not everyone loves that kind of story or enjoys that kind of story, but I personally am really enjoying it. I think the setup has been very cool with the dynamics and the flipping of dynamics. We're following our protagonist Darren, who is an indentured slave to his master. He is the only indentured slave. The rest are all criminals, and so they're essentially sold into slavery for life, but he has been sold by his mother to work there for 3 years to get them out of poverty. He's treated literally terrible like all the other slaves. And then we also follow, on the flip side, his master's son, and that was a very interesting dynamic, I think, to read the 2 different POVs, and I'm really enjoying reading that. This world is really cool. Our first scene opens up and it's a crab hunting scene. So our protagonist goes up to kill a crab, and these are like giant crabs. At least I think they're giant crabs. I'm assuming they're giant. They say that the crab could feed like a man and his daughter for like at least a couple days, and like they have to strap the crabs on the back. Like, I'm picturing giant crabs here, and I thought that was really cool. The forest has like its own kind of history, and there's people of the forest, and then we also have the sharded few. We meet the sharded few within the first 100 pages. These are these people that once we had the heart of the world and that broke apart in a rebellion, and now people use the shards as magic. I think the rules of the magic system have been set up pretty well for me already. I've seen little bits and pieces as I went of what powers they are. So when you get a shard, there are people who have the ability to become sharded. Not everyone can handle the magic of the shards, and each person can handle a different amount of shards, but you never know until you like put too many shards in your chest. There are 3 different types of powers you can get from the shards. When you get 1 shard, you essentially can just do the basic powers of the sharded that everyone can do. And then you can level up to the first shard powers. There's about 50 different powers, and they rank between those 3 different rankings. And so when you get a certain amount of shards, you level up to level 1, and then you get more shards and you can level up to powers 2, and then you can level up more to like 3. And then they do talk about people that could be like more like god-like and have way too many shards, but those may or may not exist. I thought it was really cool the way they talked about the powers and the leveling up. I really enjoyed that We discussed that the powers are random, kind of, but they do think that they also have something to do with the personalities, such as someone who is more into like military and fighting will gain powers that help with the militia side of things more than people who don't. We've seen some of how the powers work. I'm really liking that. I've really liked the setup with like the cultures. For me, world building is more than just the magic system. It's the atmosphere. It's how believable and vivid a world is. Can I picture giant crabs in these trees? Can I picture a forest with these people that don't eat meat? Can I picture what's happening? Can I picture these slave trades vividly? Can I picture this person vividly? I think world building is essentially setting, and then in a fantasy book, it requires a little bit of magic and lore as well, and I've really enjoyed that. We also have these people that aren't sharded that are special, and I don't want to tell you anything about that because I feel like it's a little bit of a spoiler, but I do like the setup of a secondary magical chosen person. I'm so far really enjoying this. I think the writing is decent. It's not like the most technically strong writing, but it's definitely not terrible. I think I'm currently sitting at a 7 to an 8 for writing. I think that it is elegant. I think that the prose works. I think sometimes we have some long run-on sentences, and I think the word choice is very good. It's vivid. I do really enjoy it. It's not the most technically strong, but it's not terrible in any ways. I'm really enjoying this. I like our characters. So far I'm rooting for the character you're supposed to root for, and I am enjoying the POV that is the slave master and his privileged and little I like reading his chapter still, which I think is a positive for characters. Other than that, the plot, so far I've been enjoying the setup that we're getting. We're 100 pages in. I don't fully know where the plot is going, but I'm excited to see what exactly will happen here. I'm really enjoying this. This so far is a 4-star prediction for me, which I don't think it was in my first chapter test. Okay, so I'm about 50% into the Umbral Storm currently. Sorry for the flare on my glasses, but it's just happening. I'm still really enjoying it, but I want to scream at indie authors all of the time. This is a problem I have when reading indie books, that you do not have to put every single thing, every idea you have into your first book, into your novel. You're gonna have chances to write way more books. This book is just doing a lot. A lot. And for the most part, I'm enjoying it, so it's okay. But I don't think it's a perfect book because of that, if that makes sense. Like, if they had kind of taken away some of the ideas, they could have really perfected the ideas in the other ideas in there, and then it would have been beautiful. But because it's doing so much, we're just like scratching the surface on so many cool and interesting things. I see the potential, but like, it reads debut-ish to me, and I don't actually even know if this is a debut or not. I haven't researched that much, but it reads that way to me because it just has so much stuff going for it. I'm also a little scared that a love triangle is coming. I really hope that that's not a thing. And I should say, I think it will not be the strongest character rating for me because one of our main characters switches personalities like a light switch early on in this book. And I think if you were character driven, that would really, really bother you. It didn't bother me because I'm still interested in what that light switch personality does now, like where that switch of the light switch moves this character into intrigued me enough that I don't really care. Writing wise, I would have loved to see a slow growth into that character instead of just like all of a sudden they're like, okay, I'm a good person now. Those are just my little critiques at about 50%. I'm excited to see where this book goes. We're in a magic school currently. I also like the discussion on freedom in this book, and I like the flipping of power. So overall, I'm still having a good time. So what's happening right now is really, really cool. I'm literally 55% in, and I'm just like really enjoying the like under in the caves scenes. And there's kind of like a dragon-like creature, and it's the cover scene. It's the scene on the cover, and I really like when a book has like the cover scene, and I'm just really enjoying it. I really like the like magic system in this. I think it's really cool, and the stakes that they've made with the magic system I think is really interesting. I finished the Umbral Storm, and I had such a fun time with this book. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it's perfect. It's not. And I think we'll see some of these issues when I go through the objective stats. But my overwhelming thoughts is that the good and the great in this book outweighed the things that needed a little bit of help. In some ways, it reminds me of Ashes of the Sun. It did the thing that Ashes of the Sun did too, where it made me forget about the things I don't like. It uses plot devices, these things I typically don't like in fantasy, but made me not hate them. It kind of just, it had so many things to grab onto outside of those plot devices that I didn't hate them. I didn't mind them. I was reminded why they're such common plot devices, because when they're done well, they're done well. And that's something I really liked about the series. It's full of tropes. It's full of plot devices. But there's so much more that's unique about the world and unique about the book that those common things don't bother me as much. Because this book also does something I've been screaming from the rooftops about loving. It genre blends. There's a little bit of sci-fi. There's a little bit of fantasy. A whole lot of fantasy, actually. And a little bit of horror. We have these giant, oversized creatures coming out of rifts. Which, like, the portals and the rifts remind me of, like, sci-fi. And so does the magic system that's, like, a leveling up, like, a game. But the creepy creatures remind me of horror. They have that horror element to them. It genre blends the way that I love when books genre blend. And you know what? Its characters are its weakest point, but I still rooted for the characters. I still loved the characters a lot. I have nothing else really to say besides the fact that I had a really fun time with this. My gut reaction is that this is a 4-star. I haven't ran it through my spreadsheet yet, but I am going to run it through the SPFBO Cassidys version spreadsheet with you guys. I'm trying to be a little more objective when I use the SPFBO Cassidys version than I am in my own spreadsheet, because my own spreadsheet is about me and my enjoyment kind of weighs into all the factors, where I'm trying to be a little bit more objective when I do SPFBO, especially because I know there's books in here that I'm not overly obsessed with and I don't love as much in terms of like style of fantasy. So let's do that together really quickly and see what we get. I'm not going to run through the entire rubric with you. If you're interested in knowing what we're rating the SPFBO books on, it is on the website, which is down below in my description box. I have a blog for SPFBO Cassidys version. If you scroll down to the bottom of the page, you will see the rubric in all of its glory that we are using, that every one of us are using to rate and help us review these books. The first thing we have to talk about is characters, and as I said earlier, I loved the characters. The characters are definitely the weakest part of this book for me. They kind of sit somewhere, I think, between flat and nuanced. As we talked about earlier, one of the characters switches like a light switch personalities. We follow 3 protagonists. We follow Darren, Hest, and Aaliyah, and I think we all can agree, if you've read this book, that Darren is the main character. He is having his main character moment. We do follow these other 2 POVs regularly in the novel. I liked Darren. He's vanilla. He's your classic vanilla boy. Think Rand from The Wheel of Time. But I enjoyed his character. I liked him enough. I think, like Rand, he's a little flat. He's a little vanilla, but he's not the worst character I've ever read from. Aaliyah, again, a little vanilla, but very intentionally vanilla, which I enjoyed, and I liked a lot of what her character went through and some of the growth she had, and I think we did see personality in her character, but we had smaller moments of it. And then we have Hest, who is the character that switches like a light switch, and he is, I think, the reason this book will get a weaker score from me, just because he just didn't feel as real and he wasn't as compelling as the other characters to read about. And all 3 of these POVs do kind of run together, I will admit that. We needed a little bit more spice in some of them. I think the saving grace to this whole book for characters was I obsessed over the side characters. We meet a lot of characters on the side that I think had a whole lot of personality. We have the heirs to the magic school. We have just a lot of, we have a character that becomes friends with our main character quite early on who I think had a lot of jazz to them. We have this old lady who is a plot device that I typically hate, but I loved the old lady's personality, and I just thought the side characters had a lot of personality. So if I'm going off the rating system, I think I sit somewhere between a 7 and an 8. I think I'm gonna go with a 7 for characters because that means 75% good and 25% bad, and I think there are a lot of good things, but there are some bad things about the characters. Some things that need work. I shouldn't say bad, just some things that needed work. The plot. The plot is basic. I'm not here to tell you it's not. It follows a basic fantasy trail, but that's not always a bad thing. I don't think every plot needs to bring some uniqueness, but I do like, and it is in the rubric, to ask you if it is unique. I think for plot, I'm gonna go with a 7.5. I think the pacing was a little off in this book. It's weird to say because I think the book could have been shorter, but also could have been 200 pages longer, and so it's one of those battles. And I think the pacing was really off. I think that although we saw some cool things, it could have been maybe a little bit more unique. I do think we got a lot of foreshadowing, which I thought was cool. I predicted some things to happen, but I also didn't predict some of them, or I wasn't really paying enough attention to some of the Easter eggs, but when I saw the things happen, I was like, oh yeah, we got those Easter eggs. I'm so dumb, but I was having a good time with it. So I think we're getting a 7.5. Again, I think that there's a lot great and some things that could use some work. The world building, I think this is something where the book shines. I adored the world building. Now I think that the author leaves a lot of questions up to you. That's okay. I was okay with that. I understand maybe if you weren't enjoying the book, you wouldn't be okay with some of those questions. There's a lot of questions going into the next book. The last chapter sets up a lot of questions, but it's a last chapter. It's supposed to leave you wanting more. And if I could pick up the second book, I would. If I had the book, I would. I think we had a lot of great things. I'm giving it an 8. I really enjoyed it, but I do think that there are some issues with it. It did a little too much. The writing, again, I think I sit somewhere between 7 and 8. I noticed some issues, some pacing issues, some dialogue issues every once in a while, some character issues. I think maybe we sit at a 7? Maybe a 7.5 for writing. I think overall it was pretty technically strong. Maybe an 8. I think I'm giving an 8 for writing. I think it was pretty technically strong for me. I do see some issues, but I think it was well done. Enjoyment, I'm giving it a 9. I went back and I gave it a 7.5 for writing. I had to trust my gut. It did have some issues, for sure. And enjoyment, I'm giving it a 9. I had a really good time. 9 is very little issues with it. Slumped a little bit for me, probably around 40 to 65%, but that's normal. I find in a chunky fantasy there are parts that I just dislike a little bit less. It just took me a little bit longer to read those parts, but other than that, I had such a fun time reading this. I really adored it, and I can't wait to see what's next. I cannot wait for the second book. This has been one of my favorite indies I think I've read this year. I had a really fun time with it. Also, technically, this is a 3 on this score. It's a 7.8 in total, but I think I will be upping writing and plot in my personal ratings because I'm looking at them with a little bit more enjoyment than objectively, if that makes sense. It is a 4-star from me, but it is a 7.8 on the SPFBO rating. And now we gotta move on to the next book, which my patrons picked for me to read because I wanted to read a cozy after the high epic fantasy. I'm a little terrified for it, but we will be starting Small Miracles. So I started, and I finished Small Miracles last night. I could have updated you guys, but I decided not to because I do think I don't have a lot to say in terms of like changes throughout this book. I felt very similar the entire way through. I think if you like the start, you'll probably like the end. If you dislike the start, you'll probably dislike the end. I think this book does what it sets out to do. If you like it, you'll like it. If you don't like it, you'll don't like it. I was actually very pleasantly surprised. I had a good time with this book. It can get repetitive, I guess. I don't really think it did. There was repetitive nature in the sin counter, but not really in the writing, and the plot always moved in a direction for me. So I didn't find it too repetitive because I think that it was intentional the entire time. I think I will struggle with rating this for intentionality versus feelings because I do have some thoughts about some of the decisions that were made, but most of them were intentional in the story. So it's hard to like critique something that is just kind of not my style. Like, it was done intentionally. Small Miracles follows Gadriel, who is a fallen angel. Now Gadriel lives their life just tempting people to sin in small ways. But when their sibling asks them to help them out, Gadriel ends up having more feelings and falling back in love with a job he thought he was tired of. And I really enjoyed the story. I don't know, I'm just gonna rate it with you because I don't have a lot of other thoughts on this without going into my ratings. So I have my laptop here. Let's do it. So, characters. I think my biggest issue with this book is the characters. I think for me, they fell a little flat. I think that they kind of ran together. There wasn't a big difference between any of these side characters. Like, the side characters were essentially like one big mesh for me. And then Gadriel and Holly, I think, kind of felt similar to me. I think the only person with even a bit of personality was the villain characters, and they were very archetypal in their characters. I didn't think that they got any definition, which this is my problem. I think it was kind of intentional, but I think it would have been a better story if it wasn't intentional. So I think I'm gonna probably give characters a 7. The plot in this is very small scale. We're not talking about a big bad. We're not doing any of that. So it's hard to rate a plot. You kind of have to readjust. I have to readjust my thoughts on plot because plot is different in this than it is in the Umbral Storm. The plot is very monotonous in this. It's very just repetitive. It's very slow. It's very like with our characters. I think I feel the same way I did about the characters that I did with the plot. I would have liked it a little bit more well-rounded. The plot in this really peaks at about the last 50 pages, and I enjoyed those last 50 pages. I enjoyed that little bit of plot. I wish I had gotten that more around the halfway mark, a little bit earlier, and seen more of that plot unravel and really feel the tension of what Gadriel had to do. So I think I'm gonna say 7 again. It's 75% good, 25% bad, because I see the issues and I wish that they were done better, but I think it's done quite well. World building, which is hard because again, it's small. Now, I'm gonna struggle with the world building, writing, and enjoyment because here when things start to like kind of mesh together for me. So we might go over the 3 of them before we finalize decisions, because the world building is done a lot through the footnotes. And although the footnotes are intentional, there's no reason for this book to have footnotes. They felt like lazy writing to me because we just got footnotes to tell us a little bit of tidbit of history, but it felt very empty to the rest of the plot. And we didn't always get those footnotes. For most of the book, the footnote is just the sin counter. And I liked it being the sin counter. It could have just stayed the sin counter. The little tidbits just kind of felt like the author wanted to give us more but didn't know how to do it within the actual story. I didn't like that. I really didn't like that, but I think maybe that's enjoyment for me. It's really hard. I think whether it's enjoyment or not, if I take it out of writing, I won't take it out of enjoyment. If I take it out of enjoyment, I won't take it out of writing kind of style, if that makes sense. But the world building, if I'm taking away the footnotes, if I'm taking away how the world building was done, I think the world building was done quite well. I do feel it's our world, so I do feel like I can picture it. I do understand the ideas behind someone like speaking in your head. I think that was done really well, and I feel like we've all had those thoughts and feelings that the angels are giving us, whether bad or good, and it felt like someone was telling us to do something. I know I've been there. I don't believe in what happens in this book at all, but I think that felt very realistic, and I think it was done in a realistic way that I enjoyed, and I think that was part of the world building. I think the history between the good angels and the bad angels was done quite well, and the knowledge of history itself and religion and different religions was done quite well. So I think the world building will probably get an 8.5 from me, and I think the writing is going to get an 8 from me because of those footnotes, but I won't diminish the writing style then from my enjoyment. Because I think my enjoyment sits at about a 7 to 8. I had a really good time, but I did notice that it was slow at times and that the characters were a little flat, and I think it was very character driven, so I wish I had felt a little bit more for the characters. So I think, yeah, I think my writing, I think my enjoyment sits between a 7 and an 8. I think it may have been a 7 if I took out the footnote enjoyment, because that really made my enjoyment go down. And the writing's an 8, and my enjoyment's an 8. I think that kind of balance. I think essentially I could have done my enjoyment was a 7 and the writing was a 9, if that makes sense. Which puts it at a 7.7, which is right below the Umbral Storm. And my enjoyment wise for the Umbral Storm was really good. I'm gonna go put this into my real spreadsheet because my spreadsheet weights enjoyment a little bit higher, and it'll be interesting to see because the Umbral Storm with all the same ratings ended up getting a 4-star, where a 7.8 is technically a 3-star, but because enjoyment was weighted, it got that 8.0. So let's see what this compares to. I think it's still going to be a 3-star, which feels quite right to me. I got a 7.75 when enjoyment is weighted, and that ends up being a 3-star. I feel like that feels right for me. I had a good time with this book. It's nothing groundbreaking for me. It's not my typical read at all, so I'm quite happy that I enjoyed this. This was on the bottom of my predictions for vibes, so I'm very excited that I did enjoy this, and I just had an overall really good time, which is a lot of fun. I read it in one sitting. Pretty much. I finished it this morning. I read like 75 pages this morning, but it reads so fast, and I do think a lot of people who prefer a cozier or more wholesome story will like this. It's going to be a good palate cleanser for people. There is some inspiration from Good Omens in here. The author says so herself. I haven't read Good Omens or watched the show, so I didn't see it, but it did have me excited to maybe try the show or the book. I think a lot of people will enjoy this, and I was pleasantly surprised that I did. I have to ask my patrons what I'm going to read next, but I will see you guys soon. I'm going for breakfast with my sister. We're going for dim sum, so I might get you guys some behind the scene clips of that, even though this video is already going to be way too long.
Okay, I'm about 80 pages into the 13th Hour. I'm not truly sure how I'm feeling about it at this time. There's a couple plot devices I don't like, but the Umbral Storm did teach me that I can still appreciate plot devices I don't like when they're done well, so I'm still hopeful. I'm mostly just very overwhelmed by the intensity of the world building and the things I'm supposed to know, and there's just a lot of knowledge that feels important that I just am having a little bit of a struggle wrapping my brain around within 70 pages. I'm sure it'll be fine by the end of the book, and then I'm not as in love with our characters as I was in the first chapter, although I do prefer the male character to the female character. The female character is just very annoying in my head. I'm not entirely sure how I'm feeling about this book. I think I am not in love with the world building. I feel like I've been told 18 different times and ways that have started the godless. Like, we're told, oh, that's the reason that the godless were started. And then a chapter later, we're like, but this reason's also the reason why the godless were started. And then there's this, and I kind of just wish I had, like, honestly just an info dump of how the godless started, because I'm trying to wrap my brains around it and remember all these little moments, and it's just not working for me. I'm a fan of info dumps. I think info dumps can be done well, and that they help me be less confused. And I'm mostly just sitting in this book, like, very confused. I'm also hoping and wishing that the book will kind of do a better job than it is at, like, talking about the good that the wardens can do, because I think it is a fine line and a fine battle that people from the top can help, and that often it gets corrupted, but that you still need those people up there, even if it's not always benefiting the bad. And I think Ashes of the Sun did that discussion really well, saying that we're corrupted, but, like, we're needed. It just has to be changed. And I would really like this to do that. Like, the idea of the wardens is good, but they're corrupted. And I'm just waiting, and I'm hoping it'll do that. So far, I just feel like it's very negative against the wardens, and I would like a more deeper discussion about the positives and the negatives of both the wardens and the godless, and the things that some of them do good and some of them don't. You know, I'm hoping that I'll love this book, but I'm not sure at this moment in time. I'm sitting around a 3-star at about page 125.
I'm about 50% into the 13th Hour, page 191-ish. I'm seeing a couple issues with some writing style. It's a little repetitive for me, and the world building is just very, very, very vast. Like, there's a lot of it, so I'm getting kind of confused, but the author is being repetitive and reminding you about those things, which is handy, but some things are too repetitive at the same time. It's a really hard balance. I'm still overall enjoying the story. This is a story about our main character, who is one of the godless in a world where gods make everyone, and your god pretty much determines your entire fate and has rights to everything about you. But there's also a city where people can like escape, and it's governed by wardens who are supposed to like keep the peace between like the humans and their gods, and it is really interesting. It's a murder mystery, which I think is really cool. There's also a voice inside our main character's head, which is a trope I can enjoy. I love the trope when it's done well. I hate it when it's done bad. I'm not hating it in this. I think it's not the best done in this, but I'm not hating it. I'm still enjoying it. I like our main characters. They do kind of blend together, and I don't know why authors just don't put character names at the start of chapters. Like, what's the point? Just tell me whose chapter this is. Tell me whose POV I'm in. It confuses me when they don't. It just makes my life easy. So like, it is a little bit hard sometimes when they switch between POVs. Other than that, I am finding it intriguing. I'm interested in the murder mystery. I'm interested in the mystery of what our main character is, because we don't quite know. It does kind of remind me of City of Stairs meets City of Dusk, which is an interesting dynamic. I don't know if I have anything else to say. I'm unsure where my feelings are going on this one. I think it'll probably sit around a 3-star for me. I think at this moment in time, pretty much across the board, I'm sitting at like 6 and 7s for ratings, but we will continue. We will see. Oh, there is a romance. I told everyone in my prediction video that I was predicting there to be romance in this, because like, look at this cover and tell me there's not going to be romance, and I am starting to see the romance. So just saying, there is a romance. I don't really know what else to tell you. I'm enjoying it. Like, I'm not hating it, but I'm not loving it. I actually feel very similar to this as I did when I read Robert Jackson Bennett, who writes City of Stairs, where I really like aspects of it, but something just doesn't fully click for me, and most of the time it is those characters. I find that the characters a little bit more weaker than the world, but I do think that there is very heavy world building, and I like the magic. I don't know, and there's a clock. Like, I feel like it gives me like Hunger Games 2, Catching Fire vibes with like the clock that things move. There's a clock that like opens portals. It's kind of cool. I'm kind of into it. Good morning. I finished the 13th Hour last night. I ended up not having the best time with this story, but something fun about SPFBO and about SPFBO Cassidys version is that I'm not the only reviewer reading these books, and you really can see why some things work for some people and some things don't, because I do know a couple of my lovely friends who are participating in this with me enjoyed this a lot more than I did in the end, which is kind of funny because I started out strong. Me, Mel, and Rachel ended up just like reading it at the same time, and I was intrigued by the start of the book and was like, yes, I want to keep reading, and both of them struggled a little bit more. As the book neared the end, it ramped up for them, and the opposite happened to me. After I hit 60%, I was just waiting for the book to end, sadly. I just felt like it was way too long, and I think it was leading up to things that I didn't care about or didn't want. I honestly think that this book could have been a solid standalone. It would have changed a lot of the last plot of the book. I think it could have made a wicked standalone. The concepts in here, I think, could have been demantled, and I think that, I don't know, I just really would have enjoyed it as a standalone, which is weird because I don't often ask for books to be standalones. I think that this author tried to do a lot, and I'm not entirely happy with the expanding of the vision at the end, because I think they were already doing so much that adding that expansion is like, okay, but like, can we focus on the things you've already done and try to do those better instead of just expanding more? That's the kind of reader I am, though, for sure. I want the small details to all make sense. Should I tell you what this book is about? I don't know if I did that already, so I should probably do that. This book follows our two protagonists, Kale and Quinn, and Kale is one of the godless. So in this world, each mortal has a god, and they are kind of owned by their god, essentially. Their gods are free to do whatever they want. They own their soul, their body, their essence, anything. And then we have Chime, which is like a place for mortals to go kind of to be free of their gods. They still have to like listen to the rules, and they're not allowed to sin, but their gods don't have as much domain there. They're not allowed to like enter Chime. So the godless were created in Chime and they're trying to just be unknown. They never pray. They just want to fall below their own god's radar, which is really interesting. And then we have Quinn, who's part of the Wardens, which is kind of the god's second-hand men. They are the ruling power right below the gods, and they operate Chime and keep Chime sin-free and all of that good stuff. And you see our two protagonists who are on different sides of the fight end up merging together. I liked the concept, I liked the world building, but if we're going over the stats, I think where this book really fell short for me were the characters. We had our two protagonists, and they had the most feeling to them, but I still struggled knowing who was who. There wasn't a lot of personality in either of them. I definitely preferred Quinn's chapters just because in his chapters we played with the concept of memories and what memories can do to a person and how they make a person, and I really enjoyed that conversation. I didn't really understand a lot of motives in this book. For most of our characters, things just didn't completely make sense. I could see how they might get there, but I wasn't giving that like push at all. There was a lot of forced relationships in this, and I didn't love that. I felt like our two protagonists were very flat. I have not a lot of feelings about them. I couldn't distinguish them very well. And if I'm talking about side characters, their side characters had zero personality. We are being told a million times, like, we're set up this beautiful found family, and then we're being told that the godless are more than just their gods replicas. They don't just mirror their gods. They have more personality than those like static god traits. But I've never seen that. I'm just told it a million times, but I've never given the ability to like see it. I barely spend any time with these characters, but like she tries to make you care for them, but like you don't, because they're so flat. And then the gods on top of that had no personality. We barely met most of the gods, but the three that we did meet sounded exactly the same to me. They didn't have I couldn't distinguish a voice from the other besides who we were talking to, like whose head we were in or something like that. But other than that, they literally sounded completely the same. They had the same goals and motives, and I would have liked to see a little bit nuance in the gods and the villain characters. The villain characters were very much your cartoon villain, and the gods themselves, I think it would have been cool because they're called the cruel gods, but they're always cruel. I think what makes a person a better villain is when they have those nice moments. I think it would have been interesting to see how someone could worship their god because of the nice moments, the things the god does out of love for their mortals, to then snap and be like super cruel. I think that would have been way more nuanced than what I got. I just really felt like the characters really fell flat. I ended up giving the characters a 4. They really did not work for me. I do see potential. I saw the groundwork, but they definitely had more issues for me than good, which really sucked. The characters were definitely the worst part of this book for me. They were the failing attribute for this book, for sure. If we go into plot, I can't really argue with you about the plot. I think the plot was all right. Nothing unique, but was interesting enough. It had small Easter eggs, I guess. Like, you could say they were there, but they weren't really there. I don't know. I felt like the story, in order to get the mystery that the author wanted at the end, they had to relinquish some of those Easter eggs and some of that better world building. Not world building, some of that better just like plot building at the beginning in order to have that plot twist and the mystery unfold before your eyes. And I think that really put a hindrance into the story. I think the ending was rushed. Oh, I forgot to talk about the voice inside her head for characters. I did not like the voice inside her head in the end. I know I talked about it in the beginning, enjoying it, but in the end, that voice made no sense to me, and I thought that they flipped like a switch at some point, and I didn't see that proper development of that character. The plot, back to it. I think it was an average plot. There was some pacing issues for me. I think we went up and down with the plot, but in the end, I gave it a 7. I think it was done okay. There's definitely some issues. I could see it being fixed in some ways, but it was overall a really good experience. The world building is one of the strong suits of this story. I ended up giving the world building a 7. enjoyed a lot of the world building. I think that it was so interesting with the clock and the different portals to the different races and the magical abilities each of the races had, but I wish we had seen more of it. The world building was solely done through our two protagonists, and we had these cool side characters that we could have seen more world building, more magic through. I saw just glimpses of the different magical things, and I wanted to see more of it. I just felt like we were a lot more isolated to what our main character saw in the world, and I really wanted to see more. I wanted to understand more about the races. I just didn't really feel like they were done that well. But there was some cool concepts, some cool ideas, so it ended up getting a 7 because, as I said, 75% good, 25% needed some help. It could have been improved a little bit. We could have seen a lot more of the cool things of the world. Like, I liked the couple scenes where we went into one of the other worlds. I think it would have been cool to like kind of visit all of the worlds. That would have been interesting because I have no idea what any of the other worlds are like other than the three we visit. The writing was okay. I saw some issues with it, especially in that pacing. It was very, very, very repetitive, and this book should not have been this long. It didn't need to be this long. We could have cut out a lot of the repetition. I was told how many times the god lists were created, and I felt like it kept changing. We didn't get enough of those Easter eggs, those connections for me. I ended up giving the writing a 6. Again, I saw the groundwork, but I think that the technical skills needed to just be fixed a little bit better. Some of the dialogue was clunky. The voice inside your head specifically I found very clunky, and also the gods in general, their dialogue was always super clunky, and I think the writing was okay. And my enjoyment, this also went down. I think I'm going to give it a 5 just because the first half of the book was really strong for me and the last half of the book was weak for me. So I think it ends up about being 50-50. I enjoyed the first half and then I didn't enjoy the last half at all. Well, not at all. I was waiting for it to end by the last half. I was like flipping pages as fast as possible. Sadly, it just was too long for me and it didn't need to be, and it lost my interest at around 50-60%. So I think it just got a 5 for me, which puts it at a 5.80, which is a decent score. It is over the 2.5 mark for a star rating, which to me is like 50%. I think it's a passing grade for a book, and I think that there are some really interesting aspects of this. I hope more people pick it up, but it just didn't work for me, and one of those major flaws was the pacing and the characters. Okay, Scales and Sensibilities first thoughts through the iPhone. I'm on chapter 8, which is 91 pages in. I'm so far enjoying it. There is a lot of setup. I'm finding the writing a bit repetitive. This seems to be an issue in this vlog where I find writing to be a little bit repetitive, but I'm enjoying the setup. I think the characters are really well done. They have a lot of personality to me, and I just am adoring this little dragon, and I'm excited to see where the story is going at this point, and I think that's really good. For a book that I thought I was probably gonna hate, I'm just having fun with it, and I think that's all the book is asking me to do. It's not asking me to take it too seriously. I mean, there's a dragon in Regency England that like spits on you when it's scared. Like it vomits on you. It's just here for a good time. I'm about halfway in currently, and I just wanted to update you to kind of say that I'm getting a little bit bored. I just kind of want it to like keep going on. I think for a character-driven book, I really want more interactions between our couple, but I feel like they've kind of been a little bit slim. And I'm not in love with the magic and the way it's done, but that's a personal opinion, and I think it's done well for what it's doing, and I won't subtract from the overall rating, I guess, because of it, but I do wish there was more explanation. Okay, I finished Scales and Sensibility last night. I ended up having a really good time with Scales and Sensibility. I gave it a 3-star, and I don't have a lot to say. It just is what it is. I think if you're looking for a romance, a historical, fantastical romance, then this could be it. Like, it's essentially just something, I don't even know if I want to call it a romance, because, like, the romance is light, but it is there. But yeah, I don't know. It's not trying to be anything that it isn't. And yeah, if we're going over my ratings for the book, I ended up giving it a 7.5 for characters. I did really enjoy the characters. My only issue was it was a lot of insta-love, and for a romance, our interactions between the two characters were often not, like, they were few and far between. We didn't get a lot of those interactions between the two characters who are supposed to be falling in love. And then most characters, although they had like big personalities, their personality was one trait, but I still enjoyed it because the author really went into that big boldness of that one trait. But I did find that I could enjoy them. I was rooting for our main characters, and I think it was a good time. Plot, I also gave a 7.5. It is predictable. It is nothing incredible. I think it dragged at times, but it was overall well written. I could see some minor issues with some pacing, and a little bit more depth would have been needed for me. The plot, it was hard to balance the romance and then the other plot. Like, it got way more convoluted than just a romance, and I think it could have done a lot better as just a romance, but it was still an overall good time, so 7.5 I think is pretty good. World building, I gave a 7. It's hard because it is our world just in the Regency era, and I do think that we set some of that up quite nicely, but it wasn't as vivid as, let's say, like Bridgerton is or something like that. I would have liked to see a lot more of the standings of how that kind of era works than I did. I think it felt a lot more modern than what Regency would have been, which isn't bad, and I enjoyed it, but I also wish it had gone into the Regency just a little bit more. I was really like, this ball scene for me was like really lacking for like a Regency story. I love a ball scene typically, and this was like very, very much lacking. And the dragons weren't overall well explained. We kept talking about how we had dragon fairy tales and stuff. Maybe I would have liked to see some of those fairy tales come up more, like if we actually got to see some of the fairy tales. Maybe having those things before a chapter would have been nice or something like that. I just think that the world building, although done well, was lacking some elements. So again, just a 7. And for writing, I gave it an 8. It was well written. As I said earlier, we had a little bit of pacing issues and some insta-love, some character issues with like motives not completely making sense for me and feeling a little bit more forced, but I think in the end writing was just like pretty well done. The technical skills were pretty on par, so I think it deserved that 8. And then enjoyment-wise, I gave it a 7. I had a good time until roughly around 50%. I was like, okay, I need this over and done with. Like, I want to move on from this book. Like, I'm still having fun, but it just needs to rush a little bit. So I did just give it a 7 for enjoyment. Overall, still a really good time with it, but not the best time in the entire world. This book was really just an average book for me. I don't have a lot to say. It just is what it is. And I don't think that's a bad thing. And I think if that's something you're looking for, really pick this book up. It was well done. And I'm tempted to maybe pick up the second book in the sequel if I'm ever like wanting a palate cleanser. I think it worked really well for something like that. And it was really enjoyable. Also, the audiobook, which was on Scribd for me, I can't find an Audible, but it was on Scribd, was really well done. I really liked the audiobook narrator, and I would highly recommend the audiobook for this. But yeah, I don't know. It was fun. Oh, what did I end up giving it overall? I should have told you that. It ended up getting a 7.4, which is lower than both the Umbral Storm and Small Miracles, but higher than the 13th Hour, which this feels perfectly on par for me for like my feelings on the books, where the Umbral Storm is highest and we go all the way down to the 13th Hour. I didn't talk to you at all about this book, but I finished A Song for the Void. I didn't tell you a lot. I didn't speak to you at all because sometimes it's better just to not say anything, especially when you don't like a book. Obviously, it's part of SPFBO. I have to come on here. I have to review it for you. But first, let's take a trip to the Castrol Raceway. I went there with my boyfriend and some friends. this past weekend, and we just looked at some Christmas lights, and I figured I'd show you them. It's really cool. It's like a racetrack, but in the wintertime obviously can't do any racing because snow, and they put up fun light designs. And my favorite part was the Jurassic Park where we saw Santa being towed by pterodactyls, and we saw a T-Rex eating a teddy bear. But there's also some other cool things along the way. I think Humpty Dumpty falls off a wall at some point. My experience with this book was not a fun time. One, I don't like historical fiction, and this is historical fiction. I was expecting to lean a lot more into the horror. I thought it'd be a lot more fantastical since it is a finalist in the SPFBO competition, which is a self-published fantasy blog off. And I guess if you count horror as fantasy, then maybe, because there are some horror elements, but it is so lacking that for me this isn't fantasy, and I'm shocked that it went this far, and I'm intrigued to see reviews from the actual judges, see if they feel similarly to me, other than the one that pushed it through, because this was just very much lacking in the fantasy for me. And I don't like historical fiction, and the setting for this just didn't do it for me, mostly because I found that in order to be true to the setting, there was a lot of racist remarks made. And yes, that happened during the time period, but for me, if you're going to write a book during a time period like this and you're going to start calling people by the color of their skin in a discriminatory fashion, I want there to be a discussion on racism. I want it to be turned on its head. I want to be told why this is wrong. I wanted to go above the points of just being there to make it true to the time period. And maybe that's my own want. Maybe this is something that happens a lot in historical fiction. I don't know. I don't read historical fiction. I stay away from it. But in my fantasy books, I want it to be a discussion normally on anti-colonialism. I want there to be discussions on why racism happens, what's wrong with it. I want there to be more than just terminology. I truly, I don't know what else to say. And that was a really big impact to my overall enjoyment in this entire story. And yeah, let's get into my ratings, because I really don't want to talk that much about this because I'm just was not a fan. I already went through my ratings. Normally I did this like I discussed with you, but I sat down and I figured out my ratings first because I needed to think things through a little bit. I gave the characters a 3.5. This story, the characters, our main character specifically, but all of the characters, their only personality trait is the drug. It is opium. That is their entire personality trait. Our main character, if we're going to talk about him beyond the drug, his only personality trait is trauma. And there's nothing wrong with that, because I do think trauma can lead to your personality, and I think there's layers of trauma that make up someone sometimes. Rin from the Poppy War or Tao from Rage of Dragons are characters who their personality has a lot to do with the layers of trauma they've gone through in their life, but it is still nuanced. They're still nuanced characters. You see how that trauma has shaped them. In this story, I just see trauma. Like, that, there was no nuance to it for me. I felt like that fell flat. I couldn't connect to any of the characters. They just had no personalities. And I mean, part of that is because they were smoking opium the whole time, and I get that that's supposed to, like, put them in, like, a lull and they're not gonna have characters, and part of the philosophy of this story was probably that they don't have personality. But, like, it doesn't make a good story then. And you know what? That's fine. If your characters are supposed to be that way, fine, but not enjoyable for me. I need characters with more feelings, more attributes to them, more characteristics. I think that it would have been way more interesting to see the downward spiral of all these characters if I had been given personality to them at the beginning of the story, because I didn't care about them. When they're all killing each other, I'm just like, okay, you do you. Because I didn't care about any of them the entire time. So it got a 3.5. Yeah. The plot got a 5. There's not a lot of plot for me in this story, but if I rework my brain into the plot is like philosophy in this, the plot is about the discussions on what makes someone them, their identity, the conversations on consciousness and addiction. That was the plot. They were conversations within the story, and they were told through the use of the plot and the cosmic horror. But it was very minimal. It wasn't really much of a plot. It was discussions. I want a plot. And if I'm reading a plot, there was no plot. But I'm giving it a 5 because, you know what? The last half of this book was better than the first half for me. The last half did have somewhat of a plot because it brings in that cosmic horror element, but just was not there for me. I fully will say that this was not a book for me. If you like historical fiction and if you want a philosophy book, pick this up. Just not for me. World building, again, I'm giving it a 3, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry to that I didn't enjoy this. I got a 3 because the world building of the time setting is there. The horror, there's no atmosphere. Like, if I'm looking at my rubric, does the atmosphere work? I didn't feel like there was any atmosphere. It's supposed to be a horror book. Like, let alone if the fact that it's in a fantasy competition, it should be fantasy. There was no fantastical world building, but if the author themselves calls it a cosmic horror, I expected a lot more horror. I expected the atmosphere of a horror. I didn't really get that. Did I feel immersed in the story? I didn't. I really didn't. Honestly, it took me way too long to read this. I picked this one up because I thought it was going to be short, quick, easy, and it took me days and days and days to read this. I just kept putting it down, literally like a sentence in, and not picking it back up, and I really struggled. But it is our world, so I can picture the setting, but was it unique? No, it reminds me of a TV show that many of us know that I think you would classify as a cosmic horror. The ending of that TV show was not very good. And I don't want to spoil what TV show that is because it spoils the TV show or the book for you, but it really, really reminded me of that. And I just was not interested in the world building because it was so minimal. Again, I don't like historical fiction. Maybe this is good world building for historical fiction, but for a book that's supposed to be fantasy or horror, I didn't get it. I like both fantasy and horror too. So it just did not work for me. I feel so bad right now, but like, it's just a book that did not work for me. I did not enjoy it. And it sucks that I have to talk to you about it in such a descriptive capacity, where normally if it was in like a wrap-up or something, I could just say I didn't like it, blank, 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 let's move on. But because I'm literally analyzing it for SPFBO, I have to discuss it, and it's really, really crappy, and I feel really bad. The thing that I will say this book did wonderfully is writing. I think that this is so technically strong written, and that's why I think if you like something historical fiction with a little bit, like, there are some supernatural elements to it. There is a supernatural element to it. Like, there is the cosmic horror to it. It's just very minimal for what I wanted. Then you will like this because it is technically strong. Like, it is very beautifully written. The dialogue was nice. The descriptions of things were nice. It had a good pace to it. I did find it a little repetitive, and that's pretty much my only complaint about it. So I gave writing a 9. I thought it was really, like, actually strongly written, but everything else just failed for me. And of course, if you've listened to me rant about this, I'm so sorry, but my enjoyment was a 1. I wanted to put this book down so many times. If I had not been reading it for SPFBO Cassidys version, it would have been a DNF within the first 30 pages, and then probably again later on once I pushed through. It was not a book for me, and it sucks. I will not be giving this a review on Goodreads. This will be the only review you see from me. It will be in this video. I don't even know if I'll talk about it in a wrap-up, because sometimes it doesn't feel fair to not love a book and to discuss my not love of a book and review of a book when it's something I would have never picked up. I do not like historical fiction. I have learned that this year. Any book I've picked up that has been historical fiction, I have been so bored of. I do not like it. It is not for me. It really showed. I thought the horror part would be strong for me, and it just did not work for me. If you do like historical fiction, pick it up. Try it. I believe that every book has a person that will love it, and there are people who love it. I mean, someone put it as a finalist in SPFBO 8. Fantasy Faction enjoyed it. I think they gave it an 8.5, which my overall score for it was a 4.30, which, if you want to know, leads to a 2-star based on that rating, but on my actual spreadsheet that I use that weights enjoyment, it is a 1-star, which feels strong for me because I like to weight my enjoyment a little bit higher, and my enjoyment was so low, but it is a 4.30 for SPFBO, which is the lowest score I've given. Let's flip on over and look at all the finalists. So that is the end to the part 1 of my SPFBO vlog. I hope you enjoyed it. Let's look at the books I read. I read these 5 books and I definitely went out of my comfort zone a lot in the first 5, and I'm quite impressed with how everything went. We had The Umbral Storm, Small Miracles, Scales and Sensibility, The 13th Hour, and Song for the Void. We had some wins that I was correct on and some that I wasn't correct on. I do think that my gut was more right than wrong, but we'll see. We will see as time goes on. I definitely found some new favorites. I will definitely be continuing on with The Umbral Storm, and I want to read more from this author as well. I definitely plan on picking up another series from them. Small Miracles I had a really good fun time with, and I would definitely read again and recommend. Same with Scales and Sensibilities, I had a fun time with. These 2 I didn't love as much, but that's okay. I mean, I read outside my comfort zone. We have 5 more books to read still, but it will be happening in another vlog. I have these 4 plus Mysterious Ways, and I left myself some chunkers and some scary ones. These are all quite chunky compared to some of the other ones, but I'm super excited. Thank you guys for hanging out with me. If you made it all the way to the end of this video and you'd like to leave me an emoji just to say you were here, leave me a sunshine emoji. And if you'd like to connect with me on other platforms, my Bookstagram, my Book Twitter, my Goodreads, and my Patreon are all linked in the description bar below. Have yourselves an absolutely remarkable day.